Hello and welcome back to the Go-Stroid development series. Today we'll be expanding upon our previously created projectiles by creating a factory that will handle all of the spawning creation for every entity that actually needs to use them. It'll kind of handle a lot of the setting of their stats, their sprites, kind of all of that for us. It's a one-shot thing. We just do this and we don't need to really make much edits to it in the future if we want to do something else, or something else with projectiles, which is really great. We're kind of making use of a lot of autoload stuff, or one specific autoload thing, some global signals, and resources, which is a really, really good thing to learn. Pretty much those three concepts in general of autoloads, global signals, and resources will really amplify your kind of game dev knowledge and weirdly put you kind of in a bit of a different league when it comes to making games, because at least this is what happened for me, where I started using signals in this way, and it kind of opened up what I could do massively. It kind of made everything click for me. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go and create a new resource. To do this, what we're going to do is we're going to, let me hide everything here real quick in the assets. There we go. So under our res folder here, or under our folder in our file tree, we're going to create a new folder. And this one's just going to be called resources. Now, inside the resources folder, I'm going to create a new folder called projectiles. And in the projectiles folder, I'm going to create a new script. Now, before we hit create or name it, we're going to go and change the inherits here. We're going to change inherit to inherit resource. This will allow us to create resources from the script. Now, as we kind of go through, I'll explain and show off what resources are. But for now, let's just go and rename the script. So instead of new script, we're going to call this base projectile resource, because this is going to be the base for all of our projectiles. And of course, it is a resource. So we hit create. Now we're going to go and open that script. Now, as you can see, it just says here extends resource. We're going to give this a class name to make sure we've named the resource correctly. So class underscore name base projectile resource. Now we can just add a few things to it. First thing I'm going to want to add is an exported enumerator. Now, exported enumerators are really great for a few things. I love to use them as a tagging system. Now, we're not going to be putting use to this enumerator yet, but we will be putting use to it in a future video, so we may as well get it set up now. So to do this, we're going to write export underscore enum, open up some parentheses, then we're going to write var afterwards. I'm going to call this tag, and it's going to be of type string, not strong, a string, and I'm going to set it equal to an empty string. So we now know that we have an enum here for strings, but as you can see, it says it requires at least one argument. Well, we put in the arguments in these parameters, or in the parentheses here, so we give it parameters. I'm going to give it two tags. We have to make sure to open up strings for this. So the first one will be an empty string, then I'm going to use a comma. The second one will be for the player, and the third one will be for the enemy. So technically speaking, you don't need this first one here. So let's go and do that like so. We'll just do two. That's being grumpy with me. There we go. And now where it says equals, we'll make sure that's an empty string. So this is what we should have. Export enum player enemy for our tags, and it will be called tag, and it will be of type string. We can go one step further with the naming here. We can go projectile underscore tag. This, what I would like to basically use this for in the future is to allow the factory basically to set what type of projectile this is, so it can set what hitboxes need to ignore and kind of accept as collisions. This kind of why this is really useful. And if you want to figure that out before I release the new video, give it a try. But until then, that's all we need for at least the tagging system. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is an export var for projectile underscore damage, because we're going to want a damage value for our projectiles, right? That way we can actually start doing damage to UFOs, to the meteors, and actually start breaking them down. So we want our damage. We're going to want another export variable for a speed. So let's go projectile underscore speed. I figured out that the speed that we're going to want to use just to start will be 1000. So I'll go 1000.0. This will be of type float. I can't spell the word export. I'm having a lot of spelling issues today. Next thing, and this is going to be the final thing in this little script, is going to be for the texture. So we're going to go at export var projectile underscore texture. It's going to be of type texture 2D. I'm going to set that equal to null. Now I'm going to hit Control S and save. And what this allows us to do is something really, really cool, right? In our resources folder here, we have the projectiles resources. I'm going to create a new folder in here. In a new folder inside of the projectiles folder, I'm going to call this the player underscore projectiles. This folder will just contain all player related projectile resources. So how do we create a resource? Well, we can right click on it. We can hit create new and resource. Now, if in the search bar here, if we search for base projectile resource, you'll see that we get something that actually pop up here, base projectile resource from base projectile resource.gd. So if I double click on that, it's going to give us a new .tres file or resource file. Now I'm going to call this the player underscore primary underscore laser. And then I'm going to go underscore 01 because, you know, we might want upgrades. We might want to do something different with this. But this is just going to be the basic primary laser. I'm going to hit save. And now, as you can see, in the right side here in the inspector, we have the tags, damage, the sped, because I can't spell speed. Edit that. There we go. You can update the folder or the actual script here and it'll update it in the actual resource itself as well. Really, really cool. And the texture. So let's go make sure that we are selecting the primary laser01.res here. Give it the tag of player. Give it a damage of, we'll just do 10. Actually, we'll just leave it at 0. Arbitrary number. It doesn't really matter right now because we don't have any reason to mess with damage yet. And finally, let's do the texture. I'm going to hit load. Go into assets, PNG, lasers, and then we're going to pick the blue laser for now. I'm going to hit Control S and save. Now, one really quick thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to move into the base projectile that we created originally, the actual scene. So in our file structure here, we can just do base projectile. Well, no, that's not going to work. Let's just do projectile. There we go. So under projectiles, base projectile entity, we want to go into the script here and the sprite here, which is for the onReady sprite. We're actually going to want to change this to an exported variable for an interesting reason. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to go export var. Now I need to make sure to name this as sprite2d because that's what we've got down here. So I'm going to hit copy on that. I'm going to set that as a sprite2d and set it equal to null. Now I'm going to hit Control S or Command S and save. Click on the base projectile entity and make sure to assign the sprite correctly. So the reason I'm doing that is because the set texture function we plan on using will not actually set the texture correctly for some interesting reason if we create this as an onReady. And that is because of how it spawns and how it runs certain things. You know, it's going to need to run certain functions before it technically becomes ready. It's a weird kind of order of operations kind of deal. So using an export basically allows everything that wants to access or modify certain things. So it allows this function to know exactly what sprite it's talking about, regardless of the kind of load order, which is kind of nice. So that's what we're going to do. Keep that as a sprite2d up here. Make sure it's named correctly down here, which it is. And now we have our resource created. We now need to actually do something to, you know, start modifying those resources, right? So what we're going to do very quickly is we're going to go to the player ship. So the actual player ship scene. And then we're going to go and modify the player weapon handler that we created. So we're going to click on the script for that. And all of this code in here is actually going to be getting removed because we don't want this being the thing that creates the projectiles. So let's go and remove all of that other than the mouse position here. And then I'm going to just write return for now. So when we click fire, all it's doing is setting a variable for the mouse position. Perfect. That's all we need. So I can remove test speed as well, which means I can remove this to do. And now, right here, we're not going to be needing the projectile packed scene either, but we will be needing an at export var for the new projectile underscore resource that we just created. Then we can type that as a projectile resource or base projectile resource and set that equal to null. Now I can hit Control S and save. And what this has really done is just really cleaned up the player script that we have here, or the player weapon handler. All this is going to do is have one line of code right here, which we will sort out in a second. So let's very quickly move away from the player ship handler by clicking on something else and then back into it. So we can update the projectile resource. Then we're going to go and click load. Go to resources, projectiles, player primary laser. Now to make sure that is correct, we can actually click on the player primary laser here and make sure, it's tagged as the player, as a projectile damage of 0, 1000 speed, and that's the texture we want to have. So once again, hit Control S or Command S and save. And now we're going to go and do something very interesting that we haven't handled yet. If I remove all of the filtering that we have here, we have this folder we haven't put to use yet for autoloads. We're going to be creating a new autoload, and we're going to be using a very specific pattern, and that is going to be known as the signal bus pattern. The signal bus pattern is basically, to really kind of make this less complicated, is a script that loads up and always exists that just contains a list of signals that can be globally used by any file or any scene that needs to use them. That can be really, really useful when you want to really, really, really decouple a lot of your code so certain things don't rely on other things. Because it would really suck, right? If we clicked the button, we clicked fire, and then this had to go and connect to the new factory that we're making, and the new factory doesn't exist, it will error out, it will crash, it will cause problems. Whereas using the signal bus pattern, it won't do that, which means it will kind of, as I said, decouple things. It won't break things nearly as much. And that is very, very useful for entity destruction, for projectile destruction, for pretty much anything that can be kind of removed on the fly or added on the fly. Very, very useful for that. So how do we create a signal bus? We're going to right click on autoloads, hit create new, hit script. We're going to name this signal bus with a capital S and a capital B, hit create. I'm going to go open that file up. I'm going to remove all of the code other than the extends here. We don't need to give this a class name, and if you do give it a class name, you can actually kind of mess with how the autoloads function, so don't go giving it a class name. So let's go and create the signal we want to create, okay? We're going to create a signal. We're going to call this fire underscore weapon, or which will make this even easier for us for future use. We can call this create underscore projectile. So something will emit create projectile signal. The factory will listen to that create projectile signal, receive what it needs to take, and then build a projectile from this create projectile signal. So to make sure that our signals can pass things through via parameters or arguments, we need to give it some parentheses. And now we need to give it, a few specific arguments. If we think about how we were creating projectiles before, we needed a packed scene, a position, and a direction. After we have the position and direction, we can kind of go from there. So the factory will always contain a kind of or a preloaded variable for the packed scene, so we don't ever have to think about that. But what it does need is the resource that it wants to take in to, get pieces of data from, a position and a direction. So we're going to call this the first parameter, the bullet underscore resource, or no, we'll call it the projectile resource to kind of stick with the theme here. So projectile resource of type base projectile resource. And then we're going to need a position for the vector2 or a vector2 of type position. Wait, no, a position of type vector2. We'll call this the underscore start position, so we absolutely know what type of parameter that is. Now this is already getting a bit long, so let's finalize this with just one more, and we'll go new underscore direction of type vector2 as well. Now I'm going to show you a really simple thing. We can copy this entire line for create projectile, just not the signal part, just create projectile and then the parameters. And we're going to go and create an emitter function. So each signal inside of Godot has the ability to just be emit, right? You can go and do, let's very quickly show this. Don't have to follow this part, but in a ready function here, I can grab create projectile and I can use dot emit. This is how you emit a signal. What I like to do is actually create functions specifically for emitting the emit signal. It allows me to kind of add an extra step when I want to add extra modifications to certain things or do other things when a signal gets fired. So to show that off, I'm going to write func emit underscore, and then I'm going to paste in that signal that we just created. So it should say emit create projectile. At the very end of the line here, I need to go with a void return type, cap that off, and enter the function. Now all I have to do is go create projectile dot emit and pass through the three parameters here. So the projectile resource, the start position, and the direction or the new direction, like so. And this will now allow me to, I don't know, print creating projectile. And this is something that will get fired every single time anything wants to emit this signal. So we don't need to do that for now. We will do this. We have our signal created. We have our function for it created. Let's give that some space. Hit Control S or Command S and save. And now, how do we make this so anything can access this specific signal? Or how do we make an auto load specifically? We go to Project Settings, Auto Load, click the little file icon here, go into our auto loads folder, double click on signal bus, and then as you can see here, node name signal bus, we click add, and now we have an auto loaded signal bus. So what I'm going to very quickly do is, I don't know if this will crash, it might crash, let's find out. It did not. If I go to remote here on the tree view instead of local, you'll see that we have this new node loaded called signal bus, which means this signal bus is now accessible from everything inside of the main tree for what needs to access it. So we have our signal sorted, we have our projectile sorted, and our projectile resource. We now need to go into the player weapon handler that we created and actually fire this signal, right? So to fire a signal like this, I'm going to remove this return function. There we go. I'm going to first call the signal bus, because this is how you call autoloads. You have to call its name. So we're going to call the signal bus. As you can see here, it's popping up, signal bus. I'm going to use dot emit create projectile. Now I need to remember the parameters I passed in: the projectile resource, the new position, and then the new direction, or the starting position and the new direction. So the projectile resource we want to pass through is just going to be projectile resource. The starting position will just be the primary weapon anchor dot global position, and the final position will just be the mouse position. And that's it. We now have our signal being emitted. We just need something to listen to it. And that's where kind of a lot of the heavy lifting is going to come in from the projectile factory, which we haven't created yet. So let's go and create that. Go to create the new scene button, go to 2D scene, because we'll just make it as a 2D scene. We can do that. I'm going to just call this the projectile factory. I'm going to hit Control S or Command S and save. Now I'm going to go and save this inside of scenes under managers, because technically speaking, the projectile factory can also be named projectile manager, because it will be manager or projectile spawn manager specifically, because it will be managing the spawn of projectiles. So we'll hit save under the managers folder. Go and give it a script as well. Go and give it a class underscore name of projectile factory. And now we can remove the process function because we're not going to be needing the process function with all these comments, but we will be needing the ready function. We're going to need access to something first, right? We're going to need, as I said before, the base projectile packed scene. So we're going to need to make sure to give ourselves something to kind of start building a projectile from, right? We need a container that needs to contain all of that data and be put together, kind of like building blocks. So we're going to write export var base underscore projectile of type packed scene. And we're going to set that equal to null. Now I'm going to hit Control S or Command S and save. You can see here the base projectile has now been kind of placed inside of the inspector for us. So let's go and hit quick load or just load. Go to scenes, projectiles, base projectile entity. So we now have our projectile already. And now what we really have to do is connect to the signal bus and then just go and create the projectile, right? So how do we connect things so the signal listens, or so this projectile factory will listen for that signal and then do something when it receives it? Well, inside the ready function here, we're going to call the signal bus again. Then we're going to use dot, and we're going to find the signal that we want to connect to. So the signal we want to connect to will be create projectile. And then we can use dot connect. And now all that is doing is asking for a callable function. Well, as you can see, we don't have any other functions. So let's go and just call this the build underscore projectile. This doesn't need to be as a string or anything like that. It could just be typed out just like this as a kind of literal. Now all we need to do is copy the name here for build projectile. Go down a couple of lines, write func, and then Control V or Command V to paste in build projectile. Now what we're going to need to do is, let's do the normal thing where we do void return type, cap it off, and we'll write pass on the inside. We need to pass through the parameters that the signal bus actually pulls through. So if we go back to the signal and look at this, we know it's going to take a projectile resource of base resource, a start position of vector 2, and a new direction of vector 2. So we can copy these parameters. I just pressed the wrong button. There we go. We can copy these parameters, go back to the factory, and we can paste those parameters inside of the build projectile. So we now know exactly what parameters we need to be using to build our projectile. So let's kind of do what we did originally with the player ship, right? Let's start building out that projectile logic again. So first thing we need to do is create the projectile, right? We need to instantiate it. So let's go var new underscore projectile. It's going to be of type base projectile entity, or we can typecast this with the as keyword afterwards so we can get some autocorrect. So let's do that. We'll go new projectile is equal to the base projectile dot instantiate as a base projectile entity. So we now have our new projectile. We're now also going to need the entity container because that's what we're going to want to put our projectile. So var entity underscore container of type node 2D is equal to, if you remember how to do this, pause the video or just do it real quick. Yeah, just keep yourself kind of doing things without me. It really helps you kind of ingrain knowledge, which is great. So is equal to get underscore tree dot get underscore first node in group, the string name of entity underscore container. Once again, if you're not entirely sure what your entity container, what group is for it, go back to your main scene, find the entity container, go to node and groups, and you'll see here entity container. You can just copy that if you're not wanting to type it out and accidentally cause typos, and paste it in. If you really want to know, by the way, this little box here says that this is in a group. If you hover over this, it'll show you the exact group that it's in. That little square with a little circle in the middle. That's the group little icon, which is really cool. It's really useful. Just that way you can look at it at a glance and just kind of know. So the next thing we want to do, of course, is our null check for if the entity container is equal to null. If it is equal to null, we want to return. And now we just set our projectile up. So we'll go new projectile, not new direction, new projectile dot, let's do set texture. We'll set that texture equal to the projectile resource, so that fancy resource that we just created. We're going to grab the texture from it. So that's setting the texture up correctly. We now need to go and do it again for the new direction. Why do I keep doing new direction? New projectile dot set speed needs to be the projectile resource dot projectile speed. And finally, we'll do the direction for new direction, new projectile dot set direction, and the direction we want to set. So this is going to be where it's a little bit different, right? We're going to want to use that normalization code that we used before to get the normalized vector movement for it. That way it will kind of react correctly. To do this, we're going to just write in mouse, the new underscore direction minus the new underscore, or the starting position, there we go, the start position. And with that done, we're going to highlight all of that, wrap it in parentheses, and use dot normalized. So that's the direction sorted. What's the next thing we want to do? Well, we need to remember that if we don't set the rotation up correctly, we'll kind of fire a projectile that's not turning correctly and it'll just look a bit odd. So let's go and grab the new underscore projectile dot rotation and set that equal to the new projectile dot direction dot angle. Didn't spell the word angle there correctly. Finally, what do we want to do? Well, we want to add the new projectile to the entity container. Let's move that space there. There we go. So we'll go entity container dot add child. Now, before I add the child, I'm going to say there is a couple of ways of using certain functionalities in this. Add child is there's a couple of ways of using it that may or may not become necessary depending on what you're doing or how much you're doing in any given frame. Now, if you have 20 projectiles firing all at once, all on one individual tick or one individual frame, it might break every now and then, or it might not. It really depends on how the engine's feeling. But what I will say is something you might want to know how to do is using the call deferred or set deferred functionalities. So what this does, we'll go call underscore deferred. What this will do is allow you to call a function that's connected to something at the end of it's like at the end of a physics cycle or at the end of a process cycle in general, if memory serves. Basically, it just makes it so it goes to the end of the queue rather than tries to do it immediately, which can be pretty useful. To finish this off, you would just do as a string here, you'd go add underscore child, and then you would use a comma here and finally pass through the new projectile. Not the new direction, the new projectile. And finally, for the new projectile, after we've done that, we're going to use we're going to need to set the projectile's global position, of course. So let's go new projectile dot global position is equal to the start position. And that's it. That's our projectile factory done. We can go test it. Let's go test it with the call deferred method. I didn't test this beforehand, so this might break everything and that might be amazing. So let's hit play, see if it breaks. Well, nothing's going to happen because of my normal thing that I always forget to do, where I forget to add things to the main scene. So in the manager container here, I'm going to go Control Shift or Command Shift A. I'm going to then go and add the projectile factory in, hit Control S or Command S and save, hit play and see what breaks. Nothing breaks. Projectile spawns, everything works fine. I can click as much as I want to, and we are back to pretty much how it was before. The only difference is now we can do some really, really fun and unique things. We can add multiple player ships. Let's go and just add multiple player ships, right? I'm going to click on the player ship. I'm going to hit Control D or Command D and duplicate. Grab the move tool. Going to add another one there. Control D or Command D and add another one there. Hit play and let's see if this breaks things. It does not break things, but as you can see, they are all spawning projectiles now. And remember, it's the one factory that is handling the production of all 3 projectiles. Now that is really, really, really cool. So what else can we do with this? Well, if we go back to the player ship, we go to the player weapon handler, we can come back down to the projectile texture, and we can also just go and change the texture now, right? Because this is the same texture as the base texture. So let's just go and hit load. Let's go into the assets. Let's go PNG. Let's go. I want my ship to fire another ship. Let's fire the red ship. Hit play. And we are now firing ships with our ship because you want more ship to go with your ships, right? That's really cool. We can also modify the speed. So let's modify the speed down to 200. Click play. And now we have really slow firing ships. This is where a lot of the customizability and modifiability really comes in, and it really makes your life easier because now you can just kind of, just go and change. You just go change it, be happy with it, it's done. Go change this laser to this one. Let's go and tweak the projectile speed to 700 and see how that feels. I actually prefer that speed. 700 feels good. I don't like the fact that there are 3 ships though, so let's go and delete 2 of those. Now hit Control S or Command S and save, and that's it. You now have figured out how to do signal buses, how to create and modify resources. You have a signal bus pattern going, which is really, really useful. And now you have created your first kind of factory. Now, this kind of like methodology here, where you use one specific node to build things out, is very object-oriented programming kind of thing. And this is just really, really cool. Like, just imagine what you can do with this. You could have like 20 different UFOs doing all of their different movements in all different directions, all trying to fire at the player ship. And you can just now emit one signal. That's it. You just emit one signal from any other scene that needs to fire a projectile. And this will go, okay, yep, I need to do this, run this function, set it up the way that the resource that is being passed through needs it to be set up. Done. Now, very quickly, the other thing is, as said, I'm using call deferred. We can use dot add child and then just pass in the new projectile, not the new direction, the new projectile. This is a naming convention issue that I should have thought about before, but I did not. Hit Command S or Control S and save. Hit play. And once again, everything is back to normal. Now, as I said, I think this is all really cool. That is all I have for you today. Next video, we will be handling something even more fun, where we go through and we handle some hitboxes, hurtboxes, health, and destruction of asteroids. That may not all be one video, but it will be the next few. Yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you're having a great day and a great game dev journey, and I will see you in the next video.